So crazy story that happened this morning in the middle of the night, 3:31 a.m. Well, 3:30 on the dot. My husband and I are sleeping. Kids are sleeping. Dogs in our room, sleeping. Out of a dead sleep, my husband and I fly awake at the same exact time to the loudest boom, boom, boom. And when I say like the loudest, it sounded like it was like someone slamming on our front door or our bedroom door. It sounded like it was right there. And let me tell you, I know what that sounds like because one time when my daughter was a baby, I was awoken to that exact thing happening, and it was the cops pounding on our front door without identifying themselves, looking for someone else whose phone pinged nearby. Whatever. So I know what that sounds like. It was even louder than that. I about pooped my pants. Immediately opened my Ring camera. We have more than one. Didn't pick up anything. Nothing out there. No noise. There is literally nothing going on anywhere. Kids are not awake. Nothing out of place. Dogs haven't moved. Washer, dryer, all of that, nothing's running. Nothing fell. Nothing broke. And it wasn't even just like one loud like bang. It was like three, like boom, boom, boom. Never found out what that was. Still have no idea what that was, but it was unreal, okay? I don't know. And I was talking to my family has like a group chat, my two sisters and in-laws and my mom. And I just said something about it. And I said, it was at 3:30 because the Ring shows when I opened it and went live, 3:31 a.m. My sister's response was, well, that's the demon hour, so that tracks. Cool, thank you for that. We have always joked about how we have a ghost named Toby. We affectionately refer to him as Toby when weird things happen. He has been with us every place we've ever lived. It's just a joke, but also like, behave yourself. But legit, what was that? I looked on our subdivision Facebook page, nothing. I looked on the Ring neighborhood page, nothing. No idea.
Sent me an email and said that she was dating this famous music producer who was sharing his body with a reptilian. That's what he told her. And before anyone gets mad at me, my disclaimer is that this is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unbelievable things that they've ever experienced. This is a secondhand account of what was shared with me. I am by no means claiming that this is factual. This is just what she experienced and then told the story because she was like, this is weird. So she met this guy who we'll call John for the story, not his real name, during 2020 when everything was locked down. On a dating app, and they start having this pretty deep conversation over the app, and he's like, do you want to come over to my apartment? And there wasn't really anywhere else that they could go, so she was like, okay, he seemed normal enough. She goes over there and she's shocked because they actually start having this really deep conversation about consciousness and universe and reality itself, and she's a very spiritual person, so she appreciated this conversation and this depth. She says she has her own understanding and perception on these topics, and she spoke about them with him very openly, and she was just really appreciating this conversation, and he was very intrigued, listening very intently to what she had to say. And she said that that's what she thinks made him test the waters and reveal himself. And he was like, before we get further into talking, I want to reveal something about myself that I don't really expect anyone to believe, but it's my truth. I was like, go ahead, like nothing really weirds me out. And he was like, okay, I share my body with a reptilian, and it started when I was 6 years old. It came to me. I was lying in bed and I felt it enter my body, and from then on it paralyzed me, and I felt like I was no longer alone in my own body. And he tells her that not only has this happened to him, but apparently he talked about it with his dad, who was a famous guitarist. And apparently he was famous enough that he's widely respected in the music industry, but he's not famous enough that like people would just know who he was if you just said his name to the average person. But then his sister is also in the music industry, and apparently she's also sharing her body. I don't know who these people are either. By the way, she didn't reveal their actual identities to me. But yeah, so she's like, what are you talking about? And he says, yeah, so it's me, my dad, and my sister. I have some half siblings too, but they're not reptilians. Just me, my sister, and my dad. She goes, you're kidding. And he goes, no, it's okay if you don't want to continue talking, but I felt like I had to share that part of myself in order to have like an open and honest relationship with you if you want to move forward. Later, he revealed to her that the reason he shared that with her was because she reacted with this very calm and like curious sense instead of fear or disbelief. Actually continued dating him. She didn't really go into detail on how she felt about it, but she said she did end up giving his reptilian side a nickname called Boris. She says when Boris surfaced, the change was immediate. He spoke with a slightly Russian accent. His voice became deeper. His expressions were calm but cold, and they were sharper. His posture became more dominant. His presence felt heavier, while John Almost the polar opposite of Boris. He was very calm, he was very gentle, he was very emotionally open, and he spoke freely about his feelings for her, telling her how much he liked her and valued their time together. But it became very clear to her eventually that Boris wanted control, wanted center stage, that he would even try to sneak in and pretend to be John. Like he would soften his tone and mimic the way that John talked, trying to pass himself off as John. But she said she could always tell because his energy was just different, and she knew that it wasn't really the guy that she was dating. She knew it was this other presence in his body. And so she would call him out directly, and that fascinated Boris. He would say, "You're not John. I want John. You're Boris." And that fascinated him. It made him completely intrigued with her and want to engage with her even more. She said sometimes when Boris would sneak in and pretend to be John, she would pretend not to notice just to see what he would do. But she would find him talking down to John as if John was inferior, treated him like he was somehow less, even though he was inhabiting John's body. And she said that she told him directly that she did not appreciate how he was talking about John because he wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for John. Apparently, he didn't like to be challenged, but he appreciated her directness. But then she started hearing them argue back and forth, two voices coming from the same body. It would be John saying he wanted his time with her, and then Boris asserting his dominance with his Russian accent, saying, "No, she's mine today." It didn't seem like John could control when Boris took over. And Boris, when he was inhabiting John's body, constantly told her how fascinated he was with her and how he wanted more time with her. And this in turn made John jealous. He would argue with Boris, saying that he was the one that chose her and that it wasn't fair that Boris was taking time away. The thing that stood out to her as strange with their differing personalities was that John was normal, he would drink normally and pass out, whereas Boris could drink. He could put down easily half a bottle, a large bottle of tequila, and like he was completely sober, no slurring of the speech, whereas John would have been slurring by then. Boris's coordination stayed the same. It was like he somehow processed alcohol differently than John did. Night, she said she was hanging out with what she thought was John when Boris took over, and she sort of challenged him. She was like, "Well, if you're really Boris and you're really reptilian, then you should be able to tell me things about myself that John wouldn't even know, that I've never told him." And Boris says, "Okay, what do you want to know?" Because I can channel anything because we are part of a collective. They'll tell me whatever I need to know. And she doesn't really question him on who they are, but she says, "Okay, tell me just something that John wouldn't know." And all of a sudden, Boris starts to describe her ex-boyfriend in perfect detail, down to a scar that he had on her forehead. And she's like, "Okay, maybe I just mentioned this to John before." But then he goes into a very specific situation, something that she had never told John about, very private interaction with her and her ex that she had never told anyone about. And he went into such specific detail that it shook her. Relayed to her what her ex had said to her in that moment verbatim and what she had said to him in response. She said there was no possible way that he could have known, and it shook her so badly that she excused herself to go splash some water on her face. It was in that moment that she became fearful of Boris, because up until that point it had just kind of been words that John or Boris was saying. It hadn't been real. Now she knew that she was dealing with something beyond comprehension, and when she came back, Boris was acting all smug, sitting on the couch because he knew that he had gotten a reaction out of her. Says, "Do you want to know how I'm such a good producer? It's because I see music differently. I see it in colors." He described composing music the way that a painter would lay colors down. He described adjusting tones the way that a painter would adjust shadows and light, that his brain just worked differently. And listening to him explain it, she said it felt like learning about a new sense that most people just don't have. And then he says, "Do you want to know something else?" She's scared, but she's curious and she can't turn away. And she says, "Yes." And he says, "We've always been here." Said, "We're everywhere. We're deep in the oceans. We're inside the earth. We never fully left." Again, she says, "Why are you telling me this?" And he says, "Because I trust you. But don't worry, everyone else will know too, because we'll reveal ourselves between 2026 and 2030. He says this conversation happened 5 years ago, but he told her during that conversation some things that would happen in the US and worldwide that have actually come to pass. At that point, they had dated for 3 months and she had had enough. The ending was quiet but final. One day she went over there and got all of her things when he wasn't there. And when he realized that nothing was still at his place, he blew up, and his reaction was over the top. And that kind of confirmed to her that her decision to leave him was the right one. She blocked him on everything, which was the first time she's ever done that in her life, but it just felt like the right decision. And also, in the time that they dated, he had never, not once, been to her place. So he didn't even know where she lived. She says that she wanted to share a few other things that he revealed to her in case what he said was true. He says, in case these things do reveal themselves, he told her that they were not good or evil. They were kind of like humans in that there were evil ones and they wanted to harm humans and they were bad and they had malicious intent. But there were other ones that were good. Those ones are protective and they care about balance and preservation. And then there's a third category, which are the ones like him, which are neither good nor evil. They're just kind of there. They're indifferent, they're observers, they're not cruel, but not compassionate either. They kind of view humans the way that humans view less evolved species. Although they do carry a sense of superiority, but they're not monsters the way that people imagine. They're not mindless predators. They are conscious, intelligent, and individual. She said that even though she blocked him and ended the relationship, she wanted to be clear that he never harmed her, he never threatened her, he didn't perform any type of like strange ritual with her, just existed and observed and revealed himself to her. And she said she's sharing this because she wanted to make people feel better if by any chance that ever happens. She wants people to be able to approach it with a little bit of knowledge instead of just blind fear. She says, whatever he was real to me, and I know what I experienced. So that was a wild one. If you have any thoughts, let her know in the comments. I'm not sure if she wanted to be anonymous or not. That's why I didn't name her. I'll send her this link in case she does want to respond to anybody. If you have a story, especially about a strange encounter or a person that may not have been quite human, that's the kind of story that I've been really into and covering a lot of lately. So feel free to send it in.
Let's read some scary stories about creepy human encounters. Be sure to stay till the end because I saved the scariest story for last. When I was 15, I regularly was at home by myself since both of my parents worked full-time and my brother had moved away to college. Well, one day during the summer, I was just relaxing at home when all of a sudden someone knocks on the front door. I get up and check the peephole and see two guys just standing in the driveway just off the porch. One of them is wearing a suit, the other wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, but facing away from the house like he's playing lookout. I decide to ignore them because they'll go away, right? Wrong. They continue knocking, but getting progressively louder and more aggressive. Finally, I decide to call the sheriff's department and ask for a non-emergency check since they're trespassing. My dumb ass decides to yell through the door that I had called, and before I can even realize how dumb it is, the guy starts kicking the front door. I freak the fuck out, run back toward the center of the house, and realize that there's a third guy trying to kick in the back door as well. At this point, I call 911 and start screaming about these three guys trying to break into my house. Notoriously, it took the sheriff's deputies longer to get there than anyone would imagine, and they see the guys walking down the road later. Stop them to question, but no arrest. When I was 13, I just got dropped off from the school bus, so I had a bit of ways to walk home. As I get close to the corner of my street, some guy in a dark blue car rolls up and asked where I was headed. I told him I was going home. The guy then excruciatingly slowed down his car to match my walk and asked if I wanted a ride home. I told him no thanks, I'm almost home. Then he continued to ask where I live and if I still wanted a ride home. Luckily, I had a phone at this age and pulled out my Nokia phone, I don't know why I remember this, and pretended to call my mom. The guy saw what I was doing and sped off like crazy. From the age of 13, I started carrying pepper spray. Late 80s, was running errands in town with my mom and two sisters. Back then, it wasn't uncommon to leave your kids in the car while you ran inside the store. We are sitting in the car waiting, and then I see an older guy walking towards our car. I just get a really bad feeling and start yelling at my sisters to lock the doors while I lock the two on my side. He comes over and spends the next couple of minutes trying to open all of the doors on the car while we are cowering in our seats. Eventually, he gave up and left. We were all 8 and under in age at the time. I just knew that if he got in the car, he would have taken one of us. In our mid-20s, my husband and I lived in a townhome without a yard in a pretty nice area of town. We knew we were purchasing a house soon, so we went ahead and got our first puppy. I'm a morning person, while my husband is not, so I would usually get up around 5 a.m. and take the puppy out to the little patch of grass across the street from our townhome. I did this for several months, no big deal. Well, one morning, while out waiting on this puppy, an old Ford van, all beat up with no windows, slowly drives by and goes back behind another building. A few minutes later, as I'm getting ready to cross the street and go back inside, the van comes back up the road to where I was getting ready to cross, stops in the middle of the road, and turns off its lights. I waved them on in front of me, and at that point, both doors of the van started to open. All I remember was seeing someone start to get out before both the dog and I felt the undeniable urge to run across the street and inside as fast as possible. Once inside, the van sped off and disappeared. The creepiest part of this whole thing was when I went upstairs to wake my husband, only to find out he was in the middle of a dream where I had been kidnapped. To this day, I refuse to run outside or go on walks alone, even on our quiet country roads, and big old vans still creep me out. Back in the early 90s, I worked as a night shift auditor for a small motel in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I was a young mother and worked nights while my husband worked days. Occasionally, my husband would stop by and check on me. It was a brutal schedule, and I truly don't know how I made it on only a couple of hours of sleep each day, but I digress. My job was to perform a daily audit on the rooms and money. Also, I would check people in and out of the hotel. The hours were midnight to 8 in the morning. One night, I had finished my audit and was watching a scary movie on the little TV they had behind the front desk. It was winter and very cold. A man came up to the door, and he was wearing a ski mask. For a second, I thought it was my husband, so I kind of smiled. He came up to the front desk, and I asked if I could help him. He asked me why I had smiled at him. Well, I knew right then I was in trouble. He waved a big knife at me and told me to turn around. I felt the most fear then. I felt like I was going to die. He hopped over the front desk and cut one of the phone lines and took the money. I had my coat and purse back there, and he took those as well. As he left, he said, "I have your purse. I know where you live now." I stayed hunched in the corner behind the front desk as he left. Then I realized he had only cut the handset to one phone and the main line on another. So I took the handset from one phone and attached it to another, where he had not cut the main line. I dialed 911 and got an operator on the line. Just as I was about to talk, the guy came back. Apparently he had dropped his knife behind the desk. I saw it on the floor as he came around. I picked it up. In my mind, I'm thinking, can I stab him? We stood there kind of facing each other, me in my uniform and this big guy in a thick ski jacket. He demanded I give him the knife. I truly thought if I tried to stab him, I would lose and he would kill me. I gave him the knife. He took the knife and hit me over the head with the handle of the knife a couple of times and then left. The police soon came and I recounted my story. As far as I know, he was never caught. The place I worked for let me have a day off, but when I needed more, because of my head injuries, they fired me. It turns out they had been robbed a few times before, but had never put in security. I did take them to court for lost wages, and I won. About a year later, maybe less, I saw on the news that a night auditor at the same hotel had been kidnapped from the motel, raped, and left for dead. They caught that guy, and he is now in prison. I can't believe she got freaking fired after everything that happened to her because she needed some more time off because she was just attacked and almost unalived. That is just absolutely insane.
This happened to us, and you swear if you would tell somebody, they would think it's right out of a movie. That's where you got it from. But in reality, it really happened to you. For privacy reasons, as always, I would change people's names. That if he would have told you this story, you would clearly believe that he got it out of a movie, that there's no possibility this happened to him, but it truly did happen. That's all he could tell me, is this really happened to me, and people won't believe me. It all happened to him in the late 90s when house phones were still a thing. Now he says this house phone situation was the one thing that made him believe in the supernatural. This all happened to him one Friday afternoon before going out with one of his boys. Now he says that his mom was the one that answered the phone, and then she gave him the phone. But she was so used to people calling the house phone, she never questioned who was on the phone. She used to just hand him the phone as regular. So he says when he answered the phone, the person sounded very staticky and very far away. So when he said hello, the first thing that they say to him is, "Don't get in the car." And he's like, "What?" And the person's like, "Don't get in the car." Mark is like, "Listen, I don't know who you are, but you ain't gonna tell me what to do." And he's like, "Don't get in the car. Whatever you do, don't get in the car. Please, I'm begging you, don't get in the car." And Marcus is just like, "All right, listen, I'm about to go out. My boy's outside waiting for me. I don't know who this is, but stop playing on my phone, especially my house phone where my mama live." And he's like, "No, don't get in the car." He's like, "You know what? I'm going to hang up right now." And the guy's like, wait. And Marcus is like, "What?" He's like, "I know exactly what you're wearing, Marcus." And he's like, "Okay, what am I wearing?" He said, "You're wearing the Tommy Hilfiger hoodie that Mom bought us 2 years ago. And you spilled ranch on it 2 days ago, and you asked her to wash it for you so you can go out tonight." And that's when Marcus looked at his mom and said, "Do you know who this is on the phone?" And she's like, "No, I don't know who it is on the phone." He's like, "Did you tell anybody about that situation that happened with my hoodie?" He's like, "No." Well, she's like, "No." And he's like, "Nah." And when he says hello again, the phone went dead. So Marcus looked at the phone and looked at his mom and told her exactly what the person had said on the phone. And that's when she told him, whoever that was, you better take that advice and not get in that car. So he did exactly what his mom said, not get in the car. And he says that the same night that his boys went out, they all got shot up, leaving the movie theaters. He was the only one to survive. And he survived because he didn't get in the car. What do you guys think that was, or who do you guys think that was on the phone warning Marcus not to get in that car?
So my followers do not disappoint. This next story comes from Kana, and I have goosebumps all over. She says that this story takes place at her grandfather's house in the Philippines. She says it was a pretty old house, but it was exceptionally large. They've experienced a lot of paranormal activity in that home, even down to a radio that turned itself off and on even when it wasn't plugged in. She said it didn't matter if it was day or night. It just sort of had a mind of its own. They just sort of got used to it, and they would just ignore it and walk by, because if they would try to switch it off, it would immediately switch itself back on and play very loudly. They've also experienced the feeling of something jumping up and down on their beds while they were sleeping in them, and still just kind of act like, it's just annoying, kind of like an annoying roommate. But all in all, they were pretty accustomed to the activity going on, and they never really had to sort of interact directly until now. So she said it was around Christmas time, and her 13-year-old sister had woken up pretty early, around 5 a.m., because she was really hungry. So she made her way down into the kitchen. When she gets into the kitchen, she notices her mother is currently making breakfast, which isn't really a surprise, as her mother often wakes up pretty early. And her mother greeted her with a smile and served her some food. So her sister's sitting there and going on about school and ranting about different classmates. And it was a little strange because her mother never really replied or said anything. She just quietly and calmly sat there, smiling at her while she watched her eat and talk. But her sister didn't really pay that any mind. They had a really close relationship and loved telling her about their lives. So her sister finishes her breakfast, washes up the plates, and then she decides, I'm gonna head back to bed because I'm still a little bit sleepy. As she's getting comfy and laying down in bed, she gets a message on her phone. And guys, brace yourselves. The message was from her mother. She goes, "Can you make breakfast for you and your sister when you wake up? I'm still at the supermarket buying food to cook for Christmas. Thank you, love you." So she quickly realizes that was not her mother that she just ate breakfast with and spoke to for all that time. And this is terrifying. So she jumps out of bed and she goes over to her sister's room and she lays in bed, and her sister wakes up to her next to her in bed. I double checked and it was like, are you sure that this wasn't a dream? And no, they said absolutely this really happened, and there was some evidence of like open containers in the trash can, and the pantry door was open for some reason. Like, how freaking creepy is that? So is this like another mimic story, I'm wondering? Just to feel like you're sitting across from your mother and she's smiling at you all creepy like, and all this time it's not even freaking her. All right guys, I'm sure she's going to be up in the comments. Let us know your thoughts, and if you have a creepy story of your own, please send it in. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
You ever met somebody and the vibes are just off? There's not really anything specific that you can put your finger on. It's just something about them that makes your skin crawl. The story was sent to us by someone who said that we could call him Jay, and he said, yeah, don't ignore that feeling. He said that this happened in about 2023, and he was at a place in his life where he was just spiraling into a depression. He said he had done everything that he was supposed to do. He had gone to school, he had gotten the job, he was working all the time, and he was supposed to have stability. He was supposed to have money. He was supposed to be in a good place, and he says he just wasn't. So it did spiral him into a depression. Relatable. Jay said that because of this depression, all he did was work, come home, and just sleep. His friends called him all the time. We're going out. Do you want to come? And he would always decline. But this one evening, his friend calls him. He's like, hey, we're going out to the town over to the country western bar, and we really would like for you to come. And Jay's like, you know what? Yeah. So he agrees. He's going to go. Get to the bar. He's with a group of his friends, and he says that there's this girl there, and she walks over to the group of friends. Jay says, I don't know her, but apparently somehow loosely through a friend of a friend of a friend, she knows my other friend. So she comes over, she says hi. She ends up inviting Jay and his friends to come over and hang out with her and her friends. They agree, they walk over. Jay says the first thing that he notices when he walks up is that there is this girl in the back of the group, and he said this is the most stunning woman he had ever seen in his entire life. He said that she was so beautiful, she almost didn't even look real. But he's looking at her and he's like, there's no way. And I'm just not in the place. Like, no thanks. I'm just going to appreciate your beauty and just leave you alone. Night goes on. Everybody's dancing. Everybody is having a great time. Jay kind of finds himself just sitting alone at the bar. Next thing he knows, this beautiful woman who doesn't even look real walks up to him and strikes up a conversation. Jay, obviously, he's like, well, I'm going to entertain this. And he said when he was talking to her, he noticed like she truly was just one of the most stunning women he had ever seen in his life. She did not look real. It was like, and it wasn't like she had beautiful skin. She had beautiful eyes. Everything was perfect. They're having a conversation, surface level stuff, nothing deep. But he says that he's noticing, yeah, she's beautiful, but something about her just is making his skin crawl and he can't put his finger on it. He chalks it up to, okay, it's because this is truly one of the most attractive people I've ever seen in my life and she's talking to me, so I'm just really nervous and that's what's making me feel like this. They continue their conversation. They don't really get into anything deep, but he does end up asking her as the night comes to an end, like, can I have your number? He said, no, I'm gonna shoot my shot. Can I have your number? She agrees, no questions asked. Gives him her number, no red flags. The only thing you notice about it is an out of state or like out of area code on the phone number. Everybody goes home, they go their separate ways. The next morning, Jay wakes up, he texts her, he's like, oh, it was really nice meeting you, blah, blah, blah. They end up having a little bit of a text conversation. He's like, I'm gonna shoot my shot again. And he asks her, would you like to have dinner with me? Immediately, yes. And he's like, there's no way. Like, you have got to be kidding. So they set a date to have dinner that next Saturday. Saturday morning comes. At this point, Jay has taken care of everything. He's made the reservation. He's set the time. He's picked the restaurant. He's done it all. He texts her and he's like, hey, listen, like, tonight for the date, like, I'm happy to come pick you up. If you're not comfortable with that, I'll give you the location and we can meet there. It's totally up to you. She texted him back and she said, no, it's okay. I'll actually come and I'll pick you up. He said that he was like, okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. If you want to pick me up, that's fine. So he agrees. Gives her the address. She pulls up. The time has come. He goes outside. He said that her car was like really nice. I don't know anything about cars because I drive a shit box, but I think he said it was like a G-Wagon or something. He's walking up to the car and he's thinking, beautiful. So beautiful doesn't even look real. Obviously has money. What am I even doing here? He gets in the car, they start driving to the restaurant, still just having surface level conversation. They arrive, they go in, tell them the reservation, they get their table. So now they start having the conversation where you get to know each other. You know, get a little more detail, a little more in depth. And she asks him like, okay, like, so like, what do you do? Like, tell me like what you do. And he ends up telling her and she's like, oh, how do you know, do you like that? And he's like, yes and no at the same time. Like it's, what I've always wanted to do, but then I started doing it and I found like, it's really not fulfilling and there's really not that much money in it. So I'm kind of looking at maybe switching career paths, just trying to go a different direction. He was like, oh, okay, like, that's really cool. So he ends up asking her, like, okay, like, what do you do? And she said, you can kind of think of what I do as, like, I'm kind of like a recruiter. After she said this, he was like, oh, cool. So you, like, work in, like, HR, like, you do, like, hiring and stuff like that? He said that she was like, like, not exactly. But then Jay is like, so do you work for, like, talent acquisition? Like, do you, like, are you, like, sublet it out to different companies and you just, like, find people who are qualified for positions? He said that she was like, I'm just really good at seeing things that other people don't. At this point, she's being very vague, so Jay is just like, oh, okay, well, I mean, like, that's cool. And she asked him, do you think that you're good at, just, like, seeing things that other people don't? Do you think so? He said he was like, I don't really know. Like, I just work in logistics, like, I don't really know. She tells him, no, but I think that you are, though. I think that you are seeing things that other people don't see. And he was like, okay. This girl continues to talk and she was like, I mean, like, you see, like, the way that I look and you see the car that I drive, if you wanted a job, like, I could talk to my boss, like, I could definitely get you a job. And she's like, we can, like, everything that you want, I can get that for you. I can get you money. I can get you cars. I can get you everything. Jay says he just kind of chuckles and he's like, yeah, like, I'm sure, what's the catch? According to Jay, at this point, she just looks at him and her emotions just kind of go expressionless. And she just says, you just have to give up something important to you. That's it. Then he just kind of stares at her blankly. He's just kind of trying to figure out what he's going to say next. He's very focused on her face, which is so perfect that it doesn't even look real. And he said that something happens. It almost looks like her face ripples, like someone tossed a pebble into water and her face ripples, but nothing else around her ripples. It's just her face. Jay ignores this, plays this off, a trick of light, maybe, it's just something going on with his eyes. It is dark in the restaurant that they're in. He lets it go. But he said he's sitting across from this girl and she is still just making his skin crawl, even though she's absolutely beautiful. Everything about her well put together, has money, but just something's not right. He's just sitting there with a pleasant look on her face. She tells him again, I really think that you would be very good at what I do. And I can get you a job and you can get everything that you want. Everything. Jay's like, He says something, his skin is crawling. There are red flags flying up in his mind. He's like, something is not right here. He says he just looks at her and he's just like, I think I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. I think I'll just find my own path. He says that immediately when he says this, her face drops. There's no emotion. There's nothing. The pleasant look is gone. She's just, and then she says, I think we're done here. At this point, they hadn't ordered any food. They had only ordered their drinks. This was like a really quick conversation. So Jay is like, okay. He gets the bill, he pays for the drinks, and she walks out without even waiting for him. Jay is thinking, okay, like maybe I can fix this. Like, I'm just gonna ride home with her. I'm not really sure what that was about. Maybe I can fix this. He gets in the car, he tries to ask her a question. She does not respond. She's just focusing on the road. She is driving back to his house. They pull up to his house and he's like, well, this was fun. This is a good time, yeah. But he gets out, she doesn't say anything. He goes to shut the door, and this is the first time that she talks throughout this entire ride. And she just says to him, hey, if you ever change your mind, all you have to do is say the word, and we'll know. He says he looks at her, and he's like, what? And she says, once we know your name, you're just easy to find. And he says she gives him this smile, which is something it's not right. The smile isn't right. He said he has no other way to explain it, but it just looks stretched, too big, too much. I don't know. He says he's like, doesn't say a word, backs into his house. At this point, Jay's like, I'm in hell no mode. Like, I'm in like this girl scared him. He drives off. He goes into his house. He locks all the doors, locks all the windows. He immediately blocks her phone number because he does not want to talk to her again. He says that night he does not sleep. The next morning, he decides to call one of his friends who was there at the bar that night. And the friend asks like, hey, how did your date go with the blonde girl? And he was like, blonde girl. Because he said this girl was definitely brunette, dark skin, dark eyes, just his type. Blonde is not his type. Fine, whatever. No, I'm just saying. But everybody has a type, and that just wasn't his thing. And he was like, no, she was definitely like brunette with like dark skin. And his friend was like, no, like she was definitely blonde. Beautiful, but definitely blonde. Blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin. He was like, no. He ended up calling another friend who was there. And he was like, hey, that girl who I was talking to at the bar when we all went out, like, what do you remember her looking like? Has a completely different description of her. The redhead, like just a completely different description. Calls another friend. He's like, what did this girl look like that I was talking to that night at the bar that I went on the date with last night? This friend describes something else completely different. Every friend he talked to did describe this girl as the most beautiful woman that they'd ever seen, just absolutely stunning, just none of the same features. Jay thinks back on the evening and he starts thinking about the deal. I can get you a job. You just have to give it something important to you. I can give you everything that you've ever wanted. I can make your life easy. I can make you rich. I can make you powerful. I can make you all these things. All you have to do is just make this deal with me. Because he just stops talking about it with his friends. He's like, nope, I'm done here. I'm done. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Jay never ends up seeing this girl again. Shortly after, he moves out of state because he did get a new job, what he had been looking for, but he did it on his own, the old-fashioned way. He says that he has no idea what this girl was a part of, why she looked the way that she did, why all of his friends saw something different, but still just perfection. He says he thinks that he almost made a really, really, really bad deal. And he says that when you get a bad vibe from someone, go on ahead and just trust that because it's usually right.
Let's read a true and scary story. Okay, I've never really told this story before, but something happened to me when I was around 12 years old that I still can't fully explain. Also, I'm from Sweden. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. Their house is over 100 years old and literally in the middle of the forest. It already has that slightly creepy vibe, especially at night. Growing up, my mom and her siblings would tell me weird stories about that house. Like how when my aunt was a baby, everyone downstairs clearly heard her crying, but when they went upstairs to check, she was fast asleep. Or how my mom has seen shadows, heard footsteps, and noticed sounds coming from completely empty rooms. I always thought they were just trying to scare me, until something happened to me. I was about 12. One night around 11:30 p.m., I was getting ready to sleep when I heard footsteps on the staircase right next to my bedroom door. The stairs are old wood, so they creak loudly when someone walks on them. At first, I thought it was my grandpa coming to say goodnight. The footsteps came up the stairs and stopped right in front of my door. But no one came in. I waited and nothing. So I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I called my grandpa. He sounded half asleep and told me he was in bed, but he came upstairs to check anyway. There was no one there. The house was completely quiet. The next night, it happened again. around the same time, footsteps on the stairs stopping at my door. By then, I was trying to convince myself that I was just tired, that maybe I was imagining it. Old houses make weird noises. But on the third night, it felt different. The footsteps came again after 11 p.m. I froze and pulled the blanket over my head because I was honestly too scared to move. I heard the stairs creaking. Then I heard my bedroom door slowly opening. I could hear the wooden floor in my room creaking, like someone was walking toward my bed. I was shaking and crying. I didn't want to look. But somehow, I forced myself to peek out from under the blanket. And I saw it. A dark figure standing right in front of me. I screamed as loudly as I possibly could. My grandpa ran upstairs and found me shaking in my bed, completely panicked. I don't even remember what happened right after I saw the figure. I just remember pure fear. After that, I started having nightmares where I would wake up and feel like someone was standing in front of me again. Even now, I'm still scared to sleep in that house. I've tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was half asleep, that fear made me see something that wasn't there. But the thing is, it felt completely real, and I still don't know what I saw. After this, I went home and told my mother what had happened, and she just stared at me silently, with a look like she knew exactly what I had seen. She didn't say anything and just tried to change the subject. I brought it up again later because I was still so scared. That's when she told me she had experienced something similar herself. But my grandparents always told her that she had imagined everything because she was afraid. I suspect my grandparents have also seen, heard, or experienced something strange in their house. They just don't want to talk about it with us. I feel like when it comes to hauntings, repeat hauntings in a house, I understand why people sometimes don't want to acknowledge it. It's almost as if if you acknowledge that you're afraid of an entity or a spirit, if that spirit is malicious, it might feed off of that fear. But I'm glad that your mom did speak up and say that she has had a similar experience, because I can't imagine just being gaslit as the only one who's experienced something in that house. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for sending in this story. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, please email them to me and I will catch them if I can, and I will see you in the next one.
What is something that happened to you, but if you shared it, nobody would believe you? This guy says that he had a girlfriend who was very afraid of the sea, and that was because when she was younger, she almost drowned, but her father saved her. This happened to her when she was 5 years old, so ever since then, she's obviously been terrified of the sea. He loves to surf, so he ended up telling her that if she was really serious about dating him, she would have to get over that fear. So he explains that other people had tried taking her to the sea to get her over that fear, but she never went in, but she agreed to go into the sea with him. He first takes her to this class to learn how to surf. After this, they both did go into the sea, each of them with their surfboards, and he says that they were having so much fun. She seemed to be very calm and very happy with everything that was happening. While they were surfing, he says that they were surrounded by people, and a big wave came that caused both of them to fall off their boards. When they resurface, they both get on their boards. They realize that they are really far away from where they were. They were exactly 4 hours away from where that wave had hit them. And if you're wondering, how does he know they're 4 hours away? Because that's how long it took them to get back to where they were when they first fell off the board. The moment that the girl is on her board and sees how far away she is from where they were, she goes into shock. She is scared. Again, she remembers that she's deadly afraid of the sea. He explained how he had to get both of their boards together because she could have possibly let go of the board out of fear. She could have drowned, so he had to quickly think of something to just make sure that she stayed above the water. By this point, she was laying on top of both of the boards and puking out of just the fear of it all. And he said that he was swimming, trying to get them both closer to the shore, and he had been swimming for 2 hours now. By this point, he was a little bit closer to people, so he was screaming out for help. These two ladies who were out there surfing were the only ones who heard him screaming for help, so they came. One of them got in the front and the other one in the back, and they swam 2 more hours just to get back to shore. He said that at some point it felt like they weren't making any progress, almost as if the sea didn't want to let his girlfriend get out. When they finally made it to shore, they went to that school to return the surfboards, and he explains how the people at the school were pissed off that they went that far because they were already wanting to close and they were just waiting for them. They basically told them what happened, and they didn't believe them because they told them
like, there was no waves here, like there was no strong currents that could have taken you that far. He explains, like, if I'm being honest, if someone had told me the story, I wouldn't have believed them either, because how was it that a current took seconds to take us 4 hours away from where we were? He just said, we simply saw the wave, we fell off the boards, we popped back up, and we were 4 hours away. Like, he cannot make sense of this. Long story short, she never went into the sea again.
It is time for another spooky story. I am Autumn in Appalachia. Send me your spooky stories. Add me on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. Same handle. Without further ado. This story comes from Claire, who lives in Ireland. I'll tag her on Facebook because that is where she DM'd me. Y'all let me know where you're watching from because that's interesting. Okay, so Claire, years ago, was in a relationship with this guy, a long-term relationship. Let's call him Rob for the video. Now, the house that Claire and Rob lived in, it was way out in the Irish countryside. There are not any other houses nearby, no town, no lights, anything like that, right? Now, this house is super old, and it was passed down generation to generation in Rob's family. It was actually, if I'm not mistaken, Rob's grandfather, his grandpa's house. Now, Rob never met his grandpa, okay? That's important for context. So, one night, it's actually Halloween night. It also happens to be Rob and Claire's anniversary night, and it's like somebody in the family's 70th birthday. So they're gonna party hardy, right? They are drinking and having a good time. Claire, being the kind person she is, decides she's going to be the designated driver for the evening. So pretty much through the whole party, she's like ferrying people back and forth to home. Eventually the evening winds down and Claire and Rob find themselves snuggling up in bed, ready to go to sleep. So Claire is later woken up in the middle of the night to the sensation of somebody sitting on the bottom of the mattress. She immediately assumes it's her boyfriend Rob. He maybe is up, not quite sober yet, a little disoriented. So she half sits up in the bed to address him. As she is sitting up, her arm brushes Rob, laying directly beside of her in the bed, dead asleep. She then realizes that whoever or whatever is sitting at the end of her bed is not her boyfriend. At this point, she's terrified, but she cannot look away from the end of the bed. She is trying to let her eyes adjust enough to the darkness to see whoever this is, when she suddenly feels the weight lift off of the bed. Very dimly in the moonlight, she can see the figure of a man standing there, and he's wearing a hat. He suddenly moves toward her, and it scares her so bad, she turns facing away from him to shake her boyfriend awake. Now, her boyfriend is facing the opposite direction. She said he's always been a heavy sleeper, and that as she is shaking him, he mumbles in his sleep, "Don't worry, it's just Granddad having a look at you." So as she hears Rob say this, she turns back to face whatever is in the room, and it's gone. She sat awake for the rest of the night. She was too scared to get out of the bed to leave the room, but the second that dawn broke, she finally gathered the courage, and she rushes out of the bedroom and said that she sat by the stove in the living area just shivering. Not long after, Rob's mom gets up, and Claire ends up telling Rob's mom, let's call her Stacy. So Claire ends up telling Stacy about the experience she had that night, and as she's explaining it, Stacy's face goes completely white. She looks utterly shocked, and then she shares with Claire her own story. Stacy explained that years ago when she first got pregnant with Rob, that Rob's dad, let's call him Bill. Stacy and Bill leave Ireland. They moved to the UK during the pregnancy. Now, while they're over there, Bill gets word that his dad, the grandpa, he's passed away. As a result, when Rob is a newborn baby, they move back to Ireland and they go to the grandpa's house. Their first night in that house, Stacy and Bill are asleep in bed. Newborn baby Rob is laying in there in a crib. Stacy wakes up in the middle of the night to see a man with a hat on, bending over the crib, looking at her newborn son. This terrifies her, so she goes to shake Bill awake, and in his sleep, Bill mumbles, "Don't worry, it's just Dad having a look at him." Claire was absolutely beside herself hearing this. I mean, how wild is it? It is two synchronized paranormal experiences that happened in the same house decades apart from each other. Stacy, Rob's mom, had never shared this story with anybody, including Rob, had no idea. It sounds like Grandpa was looking out for Rob from beyond the grave, from the time that he was a newborn to present day. Y'all let me know what you think, and stay tuned for some more spooky stories.
Let's read another scary Reddit story. Let me start this off by saying that it is imperative that you stay off the dark web. No matter what anyone tells you, no good can come from using it, and I am about to tell you why. I was 15 at the time. I had come home from school on a Friday afternoon ready to relax, kick back, and enjoy the short break. I had started using code about a year prior and was practicing it daily. Now, I had known about the dark web before this took place. This particular day, however, I decided to venture further and really take a look at the dark web. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the iceberg diagram representing the internet's content. I heard stories about what goes on the deep web, but I didn't really believe that they were all legit, so I hopped on tour and began to see what I could dig up. I started off by going on the hidden wiki and browsing through various websites, most of which contained illegal things. I clicked on a random forum link which took about a minute to load. I wish I could remember the name of it. It was a forum where people could pick a topic they wanted to talk about, such as politics, dealing with mental health, etc. There was one particular one that caught my eye. The link was in all red while the rest were all black, and it said, "Not for the weak. Enter at your own risk." Curious as to what it was, I clicked on the link and it brought me to a forum that had only one link on the whole page. I clicked on this link and it brought me to a chat room. I realized that nobody was saying anything in it, only sending links. This set off alarm bells in my head because I had an idea of what was on these links. I wish I had listened to my gut feeling, which was telling me to close out while you still can. However, the ignorant, curious teen took over me, and I started setting up some protection for myself using the codes I had learned. I later realized this amateur coding I did would not protect me from these advanced people with malicious intent. I clicked on a random link and a page loaded surprisingly fast. It looked to be another chat room. I went to type hello or something, but it wouldn't let me. I sighed and began moving my mouse to go to the previous page when a noise went off. I had received a chat. The message said, "Hello, new user. I see you have found my site. Would you like to continue?" I tried typing again, but I still couldn't. The next message sent chills down my back, and my hands are shaking just recalling it. It read, "No, son, not the keyboard." I tried turning off my computer, but of course nothing worked. Another message popped up saying, "I guess I'll take that as a no." The screen suddenly changed and a video began playing. It was a black screen, but I could hear a deep male voice say, "Unfortunately for you, you do not have a choice." I grabbed a sticky note and put it over my webcam, and the voice on the screen said, "Ah, so we're playing games now." The video then began to change, and I realized the man was taking his hand off the camera. He was a short man, but that brought me no comfort. He held up a knife and said, "Name any body part." I then for the first time noticed a cloth in the corner of the room covering something up, which I could only assume to be a body. I had had enough. I unplugged my computer and laid on the floor panting for hours until I could finally get up. I now suffer from anxiety and won't touch a computer unless I have to. Just be safe out there, guys. Okay, so let's not go on the dark web. And that is one of the stories from my next podcast episode that comes out on Sunday. So be sure you're following me on Spotify so you don't miss the episode.
Weird Spooky Storytime, and her aunt had a life-size doll in her basement that I'm 100% sure was run by a poltergeist. I was about 8 years old, and I was at my cousin's house in Watsonville, just a few blocks from the Tuttle Mansion, while my parents were running errands. My aunt and uncle were renting the place from a lady who didn't allow kids to live on the property, which was very weird. She had come to the house to do a monthly inspection, so my cousin Emmanuel and I had to go down to this basement-like room to hide from the landlord. That is so creepy. Can you imagine being at your aunt and uncle's house and being like, "Go get in the basement, the landlord's coming"? The room was very cluttered, so there were plenty of hiding spots. I remember there being this life-size doll. She was the creepiest thing ever. I swear her eyes would follow you around. So as my cousin and I are hiding in our spots across from the doll, we see her start to slowly turn her head toward our direction. Emmanuel and I each look at each other in disbelief. And when we look back, her head is completely facing us. Then the doll starts moving closer to us, like walking toward us. The moment my aunt tells us we can come out, the doll falls and we scream our heads off. Girl, I feel so left on a cliffhanger. Like, I need to know more. Like, did your aunt tell you about the doll? Did you tell your aunt what happened? What's the history on this doll? How'd they get the doll? Why do they have the doll? I have so many questions. I really hope I can come back for a part 2 for this one.
We listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me tell you guys a story time of when my aunt and her family, well, she's my mom's friend, but I take her like an aunt, moved into a cursed yard, and they started hearing things but not seeing anything. Don't get confused. I am going to be telling the story like I was there, but this story was told to me, okay? Well, they were basically telling my mom, but you know. So when my cousin and her family moved there, it was initially obviously fun. It was great. It was not necessarily whereby it's a house and then they moved into a room. No, it was one yard with a bunch of rooms in it. Do you understand? So they lived great. They lived nice with people. And then things started. So initially what happened is they started hearing footsteps on the roof, right? And my cousin was like, she genuinely thought it was just maybe leaves falling because there was this huge ass avocado tree there, or maybe it was just birds, or it could have been rats. You know how sometimes when rooms are clustered in one area, at the back of those rooms, rats tend to live there? Yeah, that's what she thought. And then it got worse. Now they're hearing baby cries, and then like her dad would get up to go and see like what's going on. Is there a baby outside? Nada, baby. They would hear the sounds, but there was nothing there. So now this whole thing started to affect my cousin, right? It affected her the worst because she started to have dreams whereby it was vivid dreams, you know, dreams that feel like they're happening in real time, but really they're not real. Do you get what I mean? Like, so she started dreaming of herself waking up and opening the door and seeing this big black horse, and you know, it was just scary. And she started to have anger issues because, you know, you would speak to this girl and she would just be mad at you, like, why are you mad at me? What did I do? You know, and she never really told us what was happening in the beginning to her. So she would just be mad out of the blue. Or she would dream of like a big black crow trying to bite her and all of that. And it was just sad. But at the same time, how can you help a mad person, like an angry person, you know, not crazy? So you wake up and you ask them like, are you okay? And she's like, if I wasn't okay, do you think I would wake up and all of that? And we'd be like, whatever, you know? So you can't help people that, you get what I mean, right? You get it. At this point, my cousin is 8 years old, right? And now she's starting to draw these scary images or whatever. And she would tell me like, all these scary images that she that she draws, they appear in her dreams, you know. And eventually she came to a point where she was like, you know what, listen, I'm not doing this no more. She told her parents what she had been dreaming of, what she had been seeing, and her parents obviously didn't believe her because they were not experiencing those things, and they just assumed it's because she's scaring herself. Maybe it's because of the things that she draws and the horror movies that she's constantly watching. Maybe it's that, you know. And they stopped her from watching the horror movies, but these things did not stop. They continued. And now because the parents did not believe her, she stopped saying anything to them because, you know, they're just making excuses for it at this point. She's like, as time went by, like the visions grew stronger, and now she started to sense that something was following her. You know, she would like see a little shadow, and you know, the shadow is standing and there's nobody there, you know, like, oh, sometimes you see a shadow walking, but at the same time there's nobody there, and this thing started to follow her everywhere. So she's like, one time she was at school, right? She went in the school bathroom and she would like open the doors to check which toilet was the cleanest, and she found that the first toilet was the cleanest, right? Mind you, she opened all these toilets to see if there was anybody there, or not really anybody there, but she opened all these toilets to see which one was the cleanest, and she saw that there was nobody in the toilet, and it was just her. So she goes into the first toilet, and you know, she starts doing her business, and she hears growling at the last stall. She gets up and, you know, gets her big girl boots on, and she goes to check the last stall, and there's nothing, but she can still hear this growling. Now now she's thinking, you know what, maybe it's just the cleaners, maybe they're doing something or they're watching something outside of the toilet. She's just gonna make excuses. So now she's like, her hair is like, her body hair starts standing up, and it's like, damn, like something is really wrong here. She gets scared naturally, and she tries to leave the door, but she couldn't. Like, you know, when you try to, you know, when you get sleep paralysis, whereby you want to scream but you can't, right? She was standing in the middle of the toilet trying to go to the door, and she couldn't. Like, something was stopping her from going to the door. And guess what this girl did? She jumped out of the window, went to go tell her teacher, and also obviously the teacher went to go check the toilets, and the teacher didn't see anything, and the teacher probably thought she was making it up because the teacher didn't believe her. And then this time, sleepwalking started. Like, these things just keep getting worse and worse the more she keeps on ignoring them. So one day, she's asleep, and she dreams of herself waking up to go to the door and open the door and leave, you know? So as she's walking towards the door or whatever, her mom called her name, and she woke up, and indeed, she was awake. She was actually sleepwalking, and she was walking towards the door. So that dream was not really a dream, it was real. Pay careful attention to your dreams, guys. So she's like, her mom like asked her like, girl, what is going on? And she's like, I told you. And the mom is like, stop watching horror movies. You probably watch them when I'm not there, you know? And from there, she's like, again, things just kept on escalating. And then it got worse because at this point, since these people were unable to get her to leave the house, now she was seeing a lady that was blue, like all blue, like her skin was blue. She was wearing a traditional skirt. She was wearing striped socks, and she also had like beads on her hands, on her waist, on her neck, on her head. And she would laugh and be like, "Come here," and she was laughing. And the problem with my cousin is every single time she'd wake up from these nightmares, she never prayed. I think, you know, maybe prayer would have saved her a little bit. I don't know. And then at this point, she was 9, right? This thing went on for quite some time, right? And she now started to experience these men who were wearing red and laughing, and these people were sleeping with her. Imagine a whole 9-year-old getting molested in her dreams. That is just very disturbing, y'all. And she just wanted to be normal like all of us, you know, because whenever we would come visit and my mom and her mom would be talking, like it would be so sad because she would be so isolated and she was just angry. So we did not understand at the time, and we did not care to ask her. We would just be like, that one is always angry, we're not gonna play with her. Auntie, the baby girl is actually going through it. So now it gets to a point where the government takes their electricity, guys. You know how it is when you people live in very rural areas. Sometimes you find yourself with no electricity. Sometimes you find your guys with no water for years, for months on years. So at this point, they will take the electricity and bring it back and take it back and bring it back. Now the electricity is gone. She starts to sit outside all the time. And then the only reason her mom started taking her seriously was when her and her husband started fighting, which is weird because now that you and your man are fighting, that's when you start taking things seriously. And everybody else started to experience these things. They started to see things, they started to hear things, and that's when the mom was like, okay, listen, let's just go to a traditional healer because you know what, it's starting to get real now. So they went to this traditional healer. Like my friend's mom, my aunt, and my cousin went to the traditional healer. When they got there, the guy told them, listen, there is a creature that's living in your house and it shapeshifts. Hence my cousin used to see the blue woman, the red man, you know, so like this thing shapeshifts or whatever, and it is causing trouble there. So but we're gonna come and fix it because it is sent by people who are jealous of y'all. So they were like, listen, y'all should expect us the following week. We're gonna be there. And you know, after the consultation, they leave and it's kumbaya. So now again, they take the electricity, y'all, and this time, baby girl is like, listen, I'm not going to sit inside the house. So she sits outside and her mom is cooking outside. You know how Limpopo people are, like, when the electricity is gone, we don't care. She starts cooking outside, whatever, and as she's cooking outside, the traditional healer guys comes, and they're like, yo, like, why are you here the same day? Because we were expecting you the following week. And he was like, yo, like, something bad is happening here, like something really terrible is happening here, so we couldn't wait until next week. So okay, they start to pray because they first waited for my cousin's dad to come home, and he was taking his sweet time, and everybody started to pray, and they started to pray, and the traditional healer was also praying, y'all. As they're praying, they're like, this creature is on the move, like it's moving, it's trying to escape, and they are praying, you know, they are praying, wherever it is, they start to pray, and eventually they go to my cousin's not closet, but wardrobe. right? They get to my cousin's wardrobe, they open and they find a tortoise there. And the tortoise has my cousin's hair growing out of its shell. My cousin's hair was different. That's how we knew that was my cousin's hair, because her hair was browner than everybody else's, so we knew that was her hair. They took that tortoise, they put it inside the bucket, and everybody started praying again. And my cousin did not look at the tortoise, y'all, but she eventually did because she was so scared. They put money in there, and the healer took it and he burnt it. And I don't know what happened to the people that were trying whatever, but everything went back to normal. They were fine. And till this day my cousin tells me that she just can't believe that actually happened to her, and I'm just like, girl, that is crazy. But as parents, take your kids seriously, guys. Even if you think your kid jokes a lot, like when they say that they saw something, take them to a freaking healer or something. Because sometimes you find your 2-year-old playing with an imaginary friend and you think they're playing, God, do they actually see something? And that person is talking to them. Haven't you learned nothing from my story times? Come on now.
This is a story I heard from a trucker who used to drive out on the East Coast. Now, he got a job to haul a load once a month to a remote spot in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina. And he thought it was really weird because they would basically have him drop this load out in the middle of nowhere. And he had no idea why he was putting this load on the side of the road, but they paid really good money. So he just really didn't care. So for several months, he would drop this load off. He would go up into mountains and there was a spot right by the woods where he could pull off, and he was told to unload the truck. Well, this one particular night, he's driving there and he ends up getting behind, so he gets there late and it's completely dark. He unloads the truck and puts it, on the side of the road where he was instructed, and he decides he's going to get a few hours sleep. And he didn't think it would be, any sort of problem because there was no one around. So he goes into this back of his truck and he starts sleeping. He wakes up in the middle of the night and he starts hearing these weird vocalizations, like these screams, like something is communicating to something else through the woods. And it's getting louder and louder. And then he hears outside of his truck all this commotion and noise. He thinks, this is just some of the wildlife in the area. I'm just going to go back to sleep. So he goes back to sleep for a couple more hours. He wakes up. It's now daylight. And when he goes into the front of his truck and he looks out his window, he sees there are all of these people hanging up in the trees, staring at him. And he said, they just all look like they were, inbred or deformed. And they were just climbing, up 10 feet, 15 feet up in these trees, just hanging from the trees like monkeys staring at him. And he couldn't figure out what was going on. And they all kind of come down from the trees and start taking the stuff from the load into the woods. And so, he got in his truck right away and started up and just got out of there. And he said he talked to other truckers, and he said these are the feral people, or they call them, the inbreds, who live in the Appalachian Mountains. They don't like to communicate with the outside world, and they get supplies dropped off to them from time to time to survive out in the woods. But the police, no one will bother them. No one even goes near them. The only time they socialize with people is when they get these loads dropped off of goods to sustain them until the next shipment comes. A lot of people don't realize that video games can be vessels for something evil or negative, right? They see it as an opportunity to trick you or lure you in. Think about it. When we're playing a video game, we are focused in on this game. All of our attention goes to it. And so we don't realize what is coming through. And the people that created this game, when they're developing it, we don't know what goes on during that process. We don't know what's written into the code or the Easter eggs in the video game. So yes, a video game can be haunted. Now, this story I heard when RD2 first came out. There was this guy, he just got the game, and he'd been playing for a week. Well, there's a part in the game when you're in Lemonade, and you're outside of St. Denis in the swamp, where you encounter this ghost woman. And this guy said he happened to be in the swamp, NWA, in this general area where the woman appears. He said he was walking around when all of a sudden, this woman just jump scares and pops out onto the screen. And he said she was transparent, looked like the ghost lady you see in this area. Well, he said right after he's seen her, he hears a man's voice on the game saying, she doesn't love you. And he said he was like freaked out. So he turns the game off and he's like, you know what, I'm done for the night. And he goes to bed. Well, he said later that night, this game turned on by itself, and he wakes up to hearing like a woman screaming. And he realizes the game has not only turned on by itself, but his character, Morgan, is right at that location where you encounter the spirit of the woman. Another creepy thing, when they were making the Fatal Frame game, the Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, the director, Makoto Shibata, said that it was a custom in Japan that when you would make a horror game, that you would go to a shrine and perform this purification ritual. He opted out of doing that because he wanted to have supernatural experiences while they were developing this game. So he said when they were recording some of the sound for the game, they picked up a voice. And when they tried to re-record this piece of sound, it just kept returning. So eventually he gave up and was like, we're just going to put it in the video game. He said another thing that happened to him was he was visiting some relatives at this old hot springs hotel in Japan. And he said he went to bed one night and he woke up and there was a man staring out the window. And he said he slowly just disappeared right in front of his eyes. He goes over to the window and realizes he was looking out at the full moon. And he said that partly inspired him to write this game and come up with the name for the game. He said another time he was in the studio, it was late and there was no beds. So he went into one of the rooms and found this ping pong table and laid down, took a nap. He said he woke up to this little girl walking in circles around the table, singing numbers in like this verse. And it was like 6, 5, 3, 8. And like, so he took that experience and put it in the game. And he said many other things happened that were actually used in the developing of this video game.
Get ready with me while I tell you this ghost story. This story was sent to my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal stories, or scary stories that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio, and this story has been paraphrased. I have a scary story that still unsettles me years later, and to this day, I can't fully explain what happened. This took place a few years ago, late at night. I was completely alone, asleep in my bed, no TV on, no background noise, just silence. What? What do you mean you were completely alone and you had zero TV on, zero music going, zero background? There is zero chance that I am staying alone and not at least one sort of noise source is on for me. Everything began with a dream. In the dream, I was standing in a room watching my grandmother pray. She was calm, focused, whispering words I couldn't quite hear. At first, everything felt normal, almost peaceful, but then the air shifted. No. The air does a little shift, and all of a sudden, nothing is right anymore. The room grew heavy, and like the atmosphere itself had thickened. Suddenly, objects began to move on their own. Books flew violently off of the shelves. Frames were ripped from the walls as if thrown by invisible hands. The sound was overwhelming. Crashing and breaking and chaos erupting all around her. I wanted to scream, to move, to warn her, but I couldn't. And without warning, everything stopped. The room froze in complete stillness. Not one sound, not one movement. And that's when I saw it. Oh no. An unfamiliar figure stood in the room, tall, shadowed, and wrong in a way I can't properly describe. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It slowly turned towards me, lifted its arm, and pointed directly at me. And then it spoke. The pointing would have been enough for me. You aren't supposed to be alive. Huh? The moment the words left its mouth, I was ripped out of the dream. Oh my God. I woke up, but not really. I was stuck in sleep paralysis. My eyes were open, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, I couldn't even take a deep breath. It felt like something heavy was pressing me into my mattress, pinning me down with impossible strength. Then the shaking started. What? My body was being violently shaken back and forth while something screamed in my face. That is enough for me, quite honestly. I couldn't see it clearly,
but I could feel it. It was close and furious and overwhelming. The sound it was making wasn't human. It was raw, distorted, and full of rage. Panic flooded my chest. Desperate, I began reciting the Lord's Prayer in my head. I couldn't speak it out loud. My mouth wouldn't move. But I repeated it silently over and over, clinging to the words like a lifeline. After what felt like forever, the pressure finally lifted. The shaking stopped, and I could move again. I sat straight up in bed, gasping for air. My heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the entire house. And that's when I noticed something else. Haven't you had enough? There was a small glowing orb floating in my room. At first, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself my eyes were adjusting, that I was still half asleep, but the orb didn't fade. It moved, slowly drifting through the air, weaving around my room as if it were exploring. I watched it for several seconds, frozen in fear. Then, without warning, it stopped and shot directly toward my bed at an impossible speed. Pure instinct took over. I jumped out of bed and ran straight into the bathroom attached to my room, slamming the door behind me and flipping on every light I could reach. My hands were shaking. My whole body felt ice cold, and I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. Ever since then, I sleep with the lights on, because no matter how much time has passed, part of me is still afraid that whatever pointed at me that night knows I survived and that I wasn't supposed to.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
On the morning of June 26, 1826, 38-year-old Samuel Willey Jr. stepped out of his house in a remote area of New Hampshire's White Mountain Range called the Notch. His wife, Polly, was at his side, and together they looked around in shock because the land surrounding their home was almost completely destroyed. There had been a huge storm the previous night, and so Sam and Polly had been expecting some damage. But what they were seeing now was far worse than they had imagined. The heavy rain had caused the river in front of their home to completely overflow, so half of their property was now completely submerged in water. The deluge had also triggered a rock slide from one side of the mountain slopes behind them, so there were also rocks and mud and entire trees that were now kind of littering their yard and adjacent fields. Sam saw, luckily, the slide had missed their house and the barn where they kept their livestock, but only barely. And there was damage to those structures from the storm itself that he would have to repair. So Sam began calculating how much time and money it was going to take to clean all this up. And next to him, he heard Polly kind of mumble to herself that this had all been a really bad idea. Sam sighed because he knew that Polly was referring to their decision to move to the Notch in the first place. And right now, staring at all this awful destruction right in front of him, he had to agree with her. This might have been a terrible idea. So up until about a year ago, Sam and Polly and their 5 kids had lived on a farm about 20 miles away from where they were right now, and it had been a very quiet, cozy life. But Sam had always had this feeling that he wanted to do something more exciting than just be a regular old farmer. And with this house in the Notch, he'd seen an opportunity for adventure and also an opportunity to make some money. So in this part of the White Mountain Range, there was a 12-mile-long road that cut through the range from one side to the other. And the Notch house was right in the middle of that road. But since this was the year 1826, this road was more like a glorified trail. It was mountainous and rocky, and neither horses nor wagons could make it all the way through. So as a result, travelers were typically on foot. And there was literally nowhere to stop on this whole 12-mile road except for the Willey's Notch house. So Sam had realized how valuable this Notch house could be if he converted it into an inn. But he also had bigger aspirations for the place, like beyond it just being a pit stop. He wanted to turn it into a destination. After all, the White Mountains were incredibly beautiful, and where the Willeys lived in the Notch was no exception. Their house was right on a riverbank in a mountain valley, surrounded on all sides by the woods and towering mist-covered peaks. It was all honestly breathtaking. And as soon as Sam had seen it, he knew that it could be a famous destination for poets and authors and artists because it was the kind of place people would write songs and books about. I mean, it was perfect. But so far, his dream, of coming out here to the Notch house had been a lot of work. The house was large, but really old, and it had been abandoned for a while before he and his family got there, so it was in really bad shape and quite dilapidated. Sam had hired 2 men to live on the property and help him fix it up, and they'd already done some work to expand the house and the barn to accommodate more travelers. But Sam knew he still had a lot to do before the Notch House became some kind of artist's retreat. And now, with this extensive damage from the most recent storm, he had even more things to fix, which he also had to admit was actually the least of his problems. Because as he and his wife Polly looked around at the aftermath of the storm, he knew, really, he was lucky that their house was even still standing, and that he and his family were even still alive. I mean, that storm was catastrophic. And as Sam thought about how close they'd come to death, his heart began to race. I mean, he wondered if Polly was right, and they should really, at this point, just pack the family up and go back to simple farming, because it was safer. But leaving meant sort of admitting failure. His big dream would be over. There would be no artist's retreat, no tourist mecca. He would not be some creative benefactor. He'd just be a farmer. So he took a deep breath, and then he asked his wife to please give this place one more chance. He promised he would do everything he possibly could to not just repair the property, but also make it safe and secure so it could withstand whatever the mountain threw at them. And Polly hesitated, but ultimately she believed in her husband, and she nodded in agreement. For the next 2 months, Sam and his 2 hired workers worked practically around the clock repairing the damage from the storm. They fixed up windows and shingles and cleared away all the debris, which took forever. And then once all the repairs were done, Sam continued working, but now he focused on improving the property. As the weeks passed by, he worked very hard to build his family a very secure home so they'd be much safer against future storms. He reinforced walls and built a whole new roof and mapped out disaster scenarios so that he and his family would always be prepared. One disaster scenario that he was especially concerned about was the large boulder that was right behind their house. He was worried that if there was another big rock slide, that boulder might just topple onto them and crush them. And he and his workers soon realized that they couldn't actually move the boulder. It was just way too big. But in the end, they found a very creative way to make sure it would not be dangerous. And while Sam did all this work, he started to feel a lot better about everything. Each security measure he put in place was proof that he didn't have to sacrifice his ambitions for his family's safety. He could have both. A few weeks later, on the night of August 28th, Sam Willey stood by a downstairs window watching another wild storm rage outside. Heavy rain pummeled the glass, and Sam could hear powerful wind battering the sides of the house. It was pitch black out, but every now and then there was a burst of lightning that would light the whole valley up for a few seconds before it went dark again. Each time this happened, a crash of thunder would follow that was so loud it shook the house down to its foundation. Behind Sam, Polly, along with their 5 kids, and the 2 men that were working on the property, were all sitting at the kitchen table. And Polly and the kids in particular were very scared, and the whole group were reading Bible verses, in these kind of frantic hushed tones, like they were trying to, will the storm to be over and to cling on to their faith, to pray that they'd be okay. Sam could hear the fear in his wife's voice, and he really couldn't blame her, because this was quite possibly the strongest storm that either of them had ever seen out here. It was even bigger than that one that completely destroyed their property over the summer. The rain seemed impossibly powerful, coming down so hard and so fast that the river had already overflowed. And each time there was a burst of lightning, Sam could see the water levels were getting higher and higher almost by the second. And so Sam was admittedly quite scared himself. He tried to keep that in, but his heart was racing and he was really anxious. But he told himself that this was the moment he'd prepared for all summer long. I mean, this was it. He had done so much work to make sure this was a safe place during storms. And he felt like they'd be okay. But at the same time, the deafening sounds outside and the terrified voices of Polly and his kids were making it really hard to believe that was actually true, that they were really okay here. So for a little while, Sam just kept looking out the window, listening to his family behind him, but then eventually he turned around, and as calm as he could, he told them all to go to bed. It was going to be fine. He would stay up and keep watch. Polly, who was visibly still very scared, nodded and got up and went off with the kids. And for the next few hours, Sam stayed at his post by the window and watched the storm. And for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of drama. I mean, it was very loud and windy. It was obvious the river was flooding. I mean, there was going to be damage tomorrow, but Sam was thinking that, maybe we're going to get through this thing. But a little after midnight, Sam heard this sudden, extremely loud banging sound outside, and he froze because he knew it was not thunder. It sounded more like an explosion. Almost immediately, Sam knew what it had to have been. The barn must have collapsed. And thinking that this storm had just taken out an entire building that he had reinforced for a storm turned Sam's worry into outright panic. And so Sam screams for his wife and the workers and his kids to wake up, that it's not safe. Get away from the windows. We have to find cover. And so for the next few seconds, the family and the workers, everyone's frantically scrambling around, trying to find a safe spot, but they don't know where it is. But as they're sort of navigating, trying to find the right place to go to weather the storm, Sam heard an even louder bang, and then there were screams all around him, and then he felt himself go airborne as a heavy object slammed into his back. The following evening, an exhausted traveler named John Barker walked down that road in the direction of the Notch house where the Willeys lived. So John was a merchant, and he was passing through the White Mountains on his way home after a business trip. And he had made this trip many times before. He knew the road, but the road currently was flooded and there was rock slides and damage everywhere, so it was quite slow going and pretty miserable. But he knew at the halfway point was this house, the Notch house, where Sam Willey and his family lived, and they were looking to convert their house into an inn for travelers. And even though it wasn't fully established yet, John knew he could very likely get into that house, have a hot meal, rest a little bit before he made the rest of his journey. But when he finally rounded the corner into the valley where the house was, he just froze because the area was a complete disaster. The river had clearly completely flooded, and now half the land in front of him was just underwater. There had also been clearly a huge rock slide. The barn was only half standing, and the field in front of the Willeys was completely buried in rocks and mountain debris. But the truly astonishing thing was that in the middle of all this destruction and ruin, the Willeys' house was still standing. And as John maneuvered his way closer to it, he realized it was more than just intact. The house was pristine. There wasn't a single thing broken or out of place, not even a window. Relieved and a little amazed, John hurried right up to the entrance and knocked. But no one answered. So eventually he just opened the door and poked his head in and called out to Sam. But he didn't hear anything. No sound of a reply and nobody moving around inside. So John tentatively stepped all the way into the house and just kept calling out to the family as he walked from room to room. But he quickly realized the house was completely empty. It was also a mess. There were clothes scattered all over the floor and beds, and sheets had been yanked around and were messy, and the Bible was wide open on the kitchen table. John stood in the middle of the home trying to work out what could have happened here. The mess suggested that, clearly the family had been here somewhat recently, but had left in a hurry. So John guessed they must have gone down the mountain to wait out the storm somewhere else, either at a neighbor's or the tavern, miles away at the end of the road. And since the Willeys were not here to allow him to stay, John needed to figure out what he was going to do. He didn't really like the idea of still sleeping in the home without them here. But he really had nowhere else to go. And it was almost nighttime, and he could barely manage the ruined road during the daylight, let alone during the dark. So even though he felt kind of bad about it, he picked a bed and tried to get some rest. But just as he began to drift off, he heard a deep, guttural moaning sound coming from somewhere outside the house. John immediately woke up and rushed over to a window. But he couldn't see anything. Night came really fast in the White Mountains, and it was almost completely dark outside. He waited to see if he would hear anything else, but he didn't. So he decided he must have imagined the sound and turned to go back to bed. But as he did, the moaning started again, and this time it was louder. John gasped as a terrible thought occurred to him. He wondered if maybe the sound was one of the Willeys and that they hadn't actually left the property, but were maybe outside, injured or in trouble because of the storm. So John sprinted outside. But again, it was pitch black outside, and he didn't have any kind of light to help guide his way. And so once he was out there, he just began shouting out, calling out to whoever it was, asking if they needed help. And eventually, the horrible moaning answered him. But the moaning kind of echoed all over the valley, so John couldn't pinpoint where it was actually coming from, other than it clearly being outside somewhere. After frantically looking around and not finding whoever it was, John realized that finding the injured person was going to be impossible right now. It was just too dark, and he would unfortunately have to wait until the morning. So, very reluctantly, John went back inside the house, and for hours he just sat in bed and listened to the moaning continue outside. Finally, in the morning, when the first bit of sun peeked over the mountain ridge, John hurried right outside to look around, and this time he quickly found the source of that moaning sound. It was one of the Willeys' oxen, moaning in pain from being trapped under some debris near the ruins of their barn. John immediately rushed forward and began hauling the wooden planks and rocks off the ox.
Recently came across these 5 terrifying facts having to do with alcohol, and if I had to be traumatized by it, so will you. Think of it as like me being your big sister, like looking out for you.
Number one, did you know that if you pass out after a night of heavy drinking, that is not your body falling asleep? That is your body literally shutting down. Passing out and falling asleep are two separate things. When you pass out, that is your body's way of trying to protect yourself. Like, it's so overloaded with alcohol and toxins that it literally shuts down. Not only does your body shut down and you pass out, your breathing slows down, your heart rate slows down, even your reflex slows down. So if you happen to gag in your sleep because you're like throwing up, you could essentially like suffocate, like you could die. Number two, alcohol is the number one I can't say the word, my Spanish comes out. Carcinogen, you guys know what I mean. It dramatically increases your risk of breast cancer, throat cancer, liver cancer, colon cancer. It literally damages your DNA. And number three, heavy or even moderate drinking does affect your brain cells. Like, the gray matter part of your brain starts to get polluted and you never fully bounce back. This is when people start having early onset dementia, or just like memory loss, or even having issues like following directions. Like, there's so many negative effects of alcohol, yet it is so glorified. You literally see alcohol everywhere. When I went that whole month and a half without drinking, anywhere I would go to, I would literally see it. It wasn't because I wasn't drinking it, so I was seeing it more. No, it's literally everywhere. You walk into a gas station, there's alcohol signs. You go into a grocery store, there's alcohol signs. On TV, commercials, people and shows, like, it's just everywhere and it's so normalized. Let me know if there's any other ones that I should know about, because I feel like just those three completely like changed my way of thinking when it comes to alcohol.
In 2019, 21-year-old Samantha Josephson was a senior at the University of South Carolina. She was a brilliant student who aspired to be a lawyer. Specifically, she wanted to practice international law. And so in order to do that, she needed to be able to speak other languages besides English. And so during her college years, she had really leaned into Spanish and become quite good at it rather quickly. During her college Spanish studies, one of her professors was a woman named Daniela Jaimes. Daniela very quickly recognized in Samantha that she had this incredible intellect and work ethic and just knew she was destined for greatness. In fact, she compared Samantha to Amal Clooney, who is George Clooney's wife and is considered to be one of the most famous international lawyers ever. And so just out of a general interest to see Samantha succeed, Daniela offered to Samantha to kind of be there for her if she needed anything beyond just Spanish, that she was there to help her with law school applications, or if she needed advice on something, or if she just had ideas she wanted to bounce off of her, she would be available. And Samantha had taken her up on this offer, and by 2019, in Samantha's senior year, the pair had become very close, forming a sort of mentor-mentee relationship. Early that year, Samantha got accepted into her target law school, Drexel University in Pennsylvania. And so after telling her mother and father, Samantha ran to Daniela's office to tell her mentor the great news. And the two hugged and laughed and celebrated right there in the office. It was clear that everything was falling into place for Samantha, and Daniela was just very, very proud of her. A few weeks later, on March 29th, Samantha decided to go out with her friends for some drinks. Now, Samantha normally spent a lot of her time studying, even on the weekends, but since she was about a month away from graduation and she was already accepted to law school and really didn't have that much work since it was the end of the year anyways, she decided she could cut loose for that weekend. So she, along with her friends, head out to this downtown area called 5 Points, which is right near the University of South Carolina, and it's an area that's full of shops and restaurants and bars, so on the weekends it is packed with college students. Samantha and her friends hop from bar to bar, they're having a great time, and then around 2 a.m. the group found themselves in a bar called Bird Dog, and while they were there, because it was so crowded, the group of friends got separated. Now, initially, the friends were trying to reconnect with each other through texts and phone calls, but they were just really struggling to locate each other, and kind of in the middle of all that, Samantha decided that she was just too tired and didn't really feel like staying out any longer, and so she texted her friends and let them know that she was going to head back to her room. So Samantha leaves the Bird Dog bar on her own, she hops in an Uber, and she starts driving back towards her campus. Several hours later, after all of Samantha's friends had also finally gone home and then woke up that following morning, they realized Samantha was not in her room. And so they called her, she didn't pick up. They started asking around to other friends who might know where she was, but no one did. And so pretty quickly, Samantha's friends were very, very worried about her because the last they had seen her, she was leaving the bar on her own. And so they were really worried something might have happened to her. And so by 1:30 p.m. that day, on that Saturday, the day after they had gone out, they called the police and reported her missing. At the same time that Samantha was reported missing, there were these two men who were in their mid-20s that were located 70 miles to the east of the University of South Carolina. They were out in this forest and they were hunting for turkeys. Earlier that day, these two men, whose names were Anders and Ryan, they had had no luck actually finding these birds, and so they were getting frustrated. And so by the afternoon, they had split up and were kind of combing this forest on their own to see if they would have more luck solo. And so Ryan, he posted up next to their truck, which was parked on this dirt road that was butted up against the edge of this big forest. And Ryan, with his binoculars, was scanning out across this field that butted up against the tree line of the forest, and he was kind of scanning the tree line, but he still was having no luck finding any turkeys. And then Anders, he actually had walked into that forest, which was right next to Ryan, and he was just kind of walking around looking for the birds as well, but he too was still having no luck. And so around 4:30 p.m., Anders, who's the one in the forest, he finally is just ready to admit defeat and leave empty-handed. And so he turns around and begins walking out of the forest in the direction of Ryan. And so at this point, he's maybe 100 or 200 feet away from Ryan, but the trees are very thick and they can't really see each other. And so Anders is just kind of walking in that direction. He's not looking for birds anymore, so he's not scouting around. He's just kind of looking straight ahead. And as he's walking, something catches his eye off to the left behind some trees. It was pretty far away, but he instinctively turned and looked, and he couldn't really tell what it was. It wasn't a turkey, but it wasn't anything that should have been in the forest. And so he decided he would go get a better look. And so he turned away from Ryan and went left and started cutting through the trees. And he kept walking until his view of this thing was no longer obscured by trees. And when he got a full look at this thing that had caught his attention, he stopped where he was. He yelled for Ryan, who couldn't see him, but he yelled for him to come into the woods and look at this. And as Ryan is running into the forest to see what's going on, Anders is pulling his phone out and calling the police. When the police finally show up, they find Anders and Ryan, and they're very shaken up, and they're sitting on the back of their truck on that dirt road where Ryan had been. And so the police pull up to them, they speak to them and get directions of how to get to what they saw inside of the forest. And then the police officers walk into the forest, they follow the directions, and before long, they're looking down at Samantha. 14 hours before her body was discovered, Samantha left the Bird Dog Bar and walked out front where there's lots of other students, and she walked to this corner of this road right in front of her, and she hailed an Uber. And then the Uber car pulls up, she hops inside, and then the car backs up and drives away. Except that was not an Uber car. That was a car driven by a 24-year-old named Nathaniel Rowland, who was not an Uber driver. He was a guy who had been driving around 5 Points all night, presumably to try to trick people into getting into his vehicle, believing it was an Uber. And finally, his plan had worked. He had pulled in right in front of Samantha. She thought it was her car. She climbed in without question. And then once she was inside, she couldn't get out again because the doors were child locked. There was no way to open them unless they were opened from the outside. Now, initially, Samantha wouldn't have noticed this. She just sat in the back seat. The car backed up. It started driving, except it didn't drive towards her campus. It drove the opposite direction. And the drive from this bar to the campus was only a couple of minutes long. And so even if she wasn't really paying attention, she would have recognized fairly quickly they were going the wrong way, because again, she's expecting to get dropped off within a couple of minutes. Now, we don't know what actually happened inside that car in terms of how Samantha actually handled this realization that he was taking her the wrong way. We don't know if she confronted him. We don't know if she tried to open the door and then realized it was child locked. We just don't know. All we know is that Nathaniel drove Samantha to some isolated area, most likely 70 miles to the east, near that forested area where her body was found. And then once he parked wherever he was, Nathaniel pulled out a knife and then leapt into the backseat of his car where Samantha was trapped, and he stabbed her 120 times. And then after he was finished stabbing her, it would take Samantha over 10 minutes to finally die. Within hours of dumping her body in the forest, Nathaniel was posting these normal posts on Facebook of him in front of his car and regular status updates, and he was having very normal interactions with his family and his friends, as if he was completely unaffected by this horrible crime he had just committed. Nathaniel was arrested within 24 hours of the discovery of Samantha's body. While he never offered any motive for the crime, it's believed he simply decided that night he was going to go kill someone. And so he just began prowling around for a victim, and unfortunately, Samantha was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nathaniel was ultimately convicted of her murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Here are the final images of Samantha as she climbs into Nathaniel's car. On the evening of December 29, 1986, a California Highway Patrol officer named Craig Pyre drove his cruiser down Interstate 15 in San Diego, California. With him was an NBC News reporter in the back seat, and there was a cameraman in the passenger seat. They were filming a segment about highway travel safety that was set to air on the evening news later that night. Officer Pyre was following his typical patrol route, but after a few minutes, they passed by a sign that said Mercy Road. It was an exit. And at that point, Officer Pyre turned to the news team, pointed at Mercy Road, and said, that's where they found the body. So a little more than 36 hours earlier, at around 4 a.m. the previous morning, a 20-year-old college student named Kara Knott had been found strangled to death in a creek right near the Mercy Road exit. Kara had been on her way home from her boyfriend's house when, for whatever reason, maybe car troubles or maybe she was trying to help someone, but she wound up in that cul-de-sac, and then while she was there, she clearly encountered someone dangerous who took her life. And so this was actually why the California Highway Patrol and NBC News were collaborating on this news segment, because Kara's killer was still not caught. And so the idea behind this segment was basically to tell drivers along this highway, like, how to stay safe while they were out there, especially if for whatever reason they had to stop somewhere along the highway, like what to do in that situation. And so as Officer Pyre passed by the Mercy Road exit and continued down Interstate 15, he turned to the news crew, and as they filmed, he began talking about the basics of highway travel safety. Specifically, he said, look, one of the most hazardous things that can happen to you beyond an accident on the highway is if you have some sort of car trouble that forces you to stop on the highway. Because once you stop, there's an inclination for a lot of people to want to leave their vehicle. But that's a very dangerous thing to do. Officer Pyre also warned people not to get into a stranger's car, because there was a running theory at this point that perhaps Kara had gotten into her killer's car. As this particular segment was filmed, the one you just watched, Officer Pyre was looking ahead, and he noticed there was a car pulled over on the shoulder of the highway with its hazards on. So he turned to the news crew and basically said, look, here's a chance for us to actually show the people in real time what to do in case your car breaks down on the highway. So he pulled his cruiser over right behind the stalled car, he got out, and then gestured for the news crew to come with him. Officer Pyre walked over to the passenger side door of this car, and through the open window, he asked the driver to get out and talk to him. The driver did, and as the camera rolled, Officer Pyre asked him to explain, what's going on here? What happened to your car? The driver said he had run out of gas and then gotten stranded on the side of the road. And then he had left his car and walked to a gas station to get a gas can, came all the way back, he put the gas into his car, but his car still wouldn't start. Now, at this point, Officer Pyre is realizing that this driver is doing basically exactly what he shouldn't be doing, according to the safety tips Officer Pyre had given. And so on camera, he basically says to this guy, do you understand how dangerous it is to have left your car like that and walked alone on this highway? Do you understand what a hazard that is? And the driver just kind of looked at him and shrugged like, yeah, I guess so. After that, Officer Pyre called the man a tow truck. His car was towed and the man was on his way, and Officer Pyre got back into the cruiser with the news crew, and they carried on. After that, Officer Pyre and the news crew wrapped up filming, and then after he dropped them back off again, they told him what time to expect his segment to air on NBC that night. And sure enough, that evening, Officer Pyre was in front of a TV as the broadcast started. And when Officer Pyre's actual segment aired on TV, to him and to the California Highway Patrol, it went great. It was a minute and a half long. It sort of hit all the high points. It showed Officer Pyre, talking about how to be safe on the highway and talking to the stranded motorist. It kind of did exactly what they expected it to do. And when it was over, Officer Pyre clicked off the TV and didn't think much about it, because it was not a big deal. It was just a basic safety video. And for the vast majority of other people who watched this clip live on TV, it really didn't stand out to them. Again, it was just kind of a routine police safety video. But there were a few people, when they watched this clip, that noticed something very specific. And within an hour of this clip airing on TV, those few people were calling the police in droves to tell them, we know what happened to Kara Knott. And the police would follow up on these tips. And sure enough, just over 2 weeks later, they had gathered enough evidence that they were able to arrest Kara Knott's killer. It would turn out all the clues the police needed to solve the Kara Knott murder case were right there in that 1.5 minute long video. Because what happened to Kara had almost happened to over 24 other women in San Diego. And those young women were the ones who saw the news segment when it happened live, and they noticed this particular detail that clearly telegraphed who Kara's killer was. They were the ones who called police. On the night of Kara's murder, December 27th, 1986, she pulled off Interstate 15 on the Mercy Road exit. She came to a stop in that cul-de-sac. Now, we don't know exactly why she came to a stop in there, but either way, she was there, and that's where she encountered her killer. Now, the other 24 women who encountered the same person, the killer, they were terrorized and kind of tortured and held hostage for a couple of hours, but eventually were let go. But Kara wasn't. During her encounter, at some point, the killer clubbed her over the head and then strangled her to death with a rope. Now, the killer, at first, had gotten away with this, until they were featured on that 1.5 minute long video. And some of those women who had survived their attack, they're watching the segment, and suddenly their attacker is on TV. Now, they had previously reported their attack to police, but to this point, nothing had been done. And now they're staring at, for sure, the person who attacked them, who's right on TV. And critically, as part of the segment, they're hearing about how this other young woman had been attacked and killed on this highway. And they're thinking, oh, this person did that to me. I barely got away. I bet they killed this girl. And on top of that, as they're watching the news, staring at their attacker, they can see there's a fresh cut over their eye. And so put that all together and they thought, boom, that's the person who killed Karen Otts. And sure enough, the police would follow up on these tips and they would confirm that the man in the video with the cut over his eyebrow was Kara's killer. And Kara's killer was none other than Officer Craig Pyre. Officer Pyre was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Since being incarcerated, he has gone up for parole 2 separate times and been rejected both times. However, he is up for parole again in 2027.
Whatever happened to the whole cloning thing? I remember back in the 90s, like everyone was talking about cloning and that they were going to clone humans. And I think they actually even successfully cloned a sheep, I believe was called Eve. And they were talking about how soon they were going to be cloning humans. But then, all of a sudden, it just went silent. And so you wonder, why don't we talk about that anymore? Like, what happened to that? Because obviously, they didn't scrap the research they were doing into cloning. So why are they being so quiet about it? There are a lot of people who believe that a lot of famous people, a lot of celebrities have been replaced with clones. And at first it sounds kind of crazy, but when you start to think about it, you know, there are several actors, musicians, and people who have just disappeared for long periods of time. And when they come back, they are almost like different people. And you wonder sometimes what happened to them and why do they look so different? So what do you think? What happened to the whole idea of cloning?
This is one of those cases where you realize that you just have no idea what's going on in anyone's house, let alone your neighbors. Every single state has had some sort of serial killer, and today I'm going to tell you guys about the most notorious killer from Pennsylvania, and this is the 48th part of the series. We only have 2 more videos after this one, and I just want to thank you guys for being here through the entire series. I'll be posting more countries, and I also am going to be starting another series focused around the states. I'm going to be talking about unsolved cases from each state because I want to be able to use this platform and you guys being incredible to kind of share some stories that I think deserve more attention that never got justice. So if you have any stories from your state that you would like to be told that are unsolved, please let me know because I would love to cover them. Getting right into this particular case though, today I'm going to be telling you guys about a man named Harrison Graham, and he's another horrible, evil human being, but no one had even the slightest idea that he was doing the horrible things he was doing. He was born Harrison Frank Graham in September of 1959. He was one of 5 children, and pretty early in life he kind of showed signs of an intellectual disability. He didn't really fit in at school. He struggled in school, and then he ended up dropping out, and allegedly he spent 2 years in a mental hospital, but that's never been confirmed 100%. In the 1970s, after becoming an adult, he gets a bunch of different construction jobs, and he moves out of his parents' house into a neighborhood in Philadelphia. And this neighborhood was known for its poverty and crime rates. It was not the safest place. So he started renting in an apartment building that had a bunch of vacant apartments in it. And so there were other people living in this building, but it just wasn't super crowded. He ended up starting to use these like empty apartments as a place to sell drugs. Even though he was dealing and selling drugs, he never really seemed violent, and no one would have ever guessed that he would have had bodies in his apartment. He seemed relatively normal. He even played basketball with the kids in the area, and all the neighbors that did know him really liked him. He seemed like a nice guy. But in the summer of 1987, so he would have been about 38 at this point, neighbors started noticing like really weird smells, like bad smells coming from his apartment. And they complained to the landlord. And at first the landlord ignores it, like, mind your business, I don't care about a smell. But eventually he started to get so many complaints about a foul odor that he had to do something. And so in August, the landlord ended up demanding demanding that Harrison leave his apartment. Instead of deciding that he would just go with this eviction though, Harrison barricaded himself inside his apartment. He boarded up the doors and the windows, and then when the police showed up, ended up fleeing out of the fire escape and getting away. So the police end up breaking down the door when he doesn't let them in, and they are horrified to see what is causing the smell in his apartment. They ended up finding the body of a nude woman in the middle of the floor, another partially nude body, and these were both women. And they found blood, drugs, and a pile of dirty mattresses with a skeleton, another female skeleton, underneath it. They realized that this man, who literally just got away from them because he ran out the fire escape, is a serial killer. And they inspect the roof and they find a green duffel bag which contained more human bones. It was bones of hands, feet, and other legs from another murder victim. Then they also look in the basement, they excavate it, and they find a skull, a ribcage, and a pelvic bone that belonged to yet another victim. They end up finding multiple bodies, but all of the bodies were in a severe state of decomposition except the 2 that were found in that first room when they broke in the door. But they were able to say that the 2 that had recently been murdered were both killed by strangulation, so it seems likely that he killed all 7 of these women by strangulation. And yes, they found out he killed 7 different women. He was put on a wanted list and they searched for him everywhere. There's a manhunt, and on August 17th, he went to see his mother. Probably was like trying to get money or trying to get her to help him flee and hide from the police, but she was like, no, I'm not helping you. And she actually convinced him to surrender after learning all the things that he had done and made him call the police. So shout out to that mom, because all too often we see in these stories that the moms aid and abet their sons and let them continue murdering and essaying and women, and she was like, no, I'm not doing that. Turn yourself in. So he ends up getting arrested and he confesses to killing, and he confesses like immediately. The 7 victims were identified as 27-year-old Cynthia Brooks, 25-year-old Valerie Jamison, 36-year-old Mary Jeter Matisse, 22-year-old Barbara Mahoney, Robin DeChazor, who was only 29, 33-year-old Sandra Garvin, and Patricia Franklin, who was only 24 years old when he killed her. They end up learning that one of the victims, Robin DeChazor, was actually his longtime girlfriend, and witnesses had seen him yelling at her, hurting her before. It sounds like no one reported it, which I don't understand why. And it's weird to me that no one suspected him when his longtime girlfriend goes missing and people saw him being not the greatest to her. Though he was found guilty of all charges, he received 6 death sentences and 1 life imprisonment, but they ended up establishing he couldn't be executed until he lived out his full life sentence, which just means he was never going to be executed. So he is still alive today. He's being held in prison. He's absolutely horrific and evil and awful, and all 7 of these women deserve to live long, beautiful, full lives, and instead they were killed and their killer gets to live a long life instead.